The ancient, awesome Okefenokee, one of the most primitive areas on the earth. A swamp so big, you could lose New York City in its green threads. To look out over this landscape with the sun at your back is to lose all sense of proportion. Your imagination comes to life. Here, you think, is where creation began. It is not voices that reach over the swamp, only echoes. The sound of misty dawns and silent days, stretching undisturbed for perhaps 1,000,000 years. The Okefenokee is a strange carpet of floating islands, vast prairies that shift to the touch like waterbeds. Left to itself, the Okefenokee would have become a forest, as rooting trees eventually locked the islands down. The swamp has survived because of fire. Every 20 years or so, in times of drought, a great purging blaze burns down to the tree roots, setting the islands free. The last one, in 1954, burned for more than a year.
We had a 70-mile wind with it. Not just a puff, I mean a steady blow.
Ralph Davis calls it the mule-tail fire, a fearsome thing that switched out of the swamp and swept over his farm and forest.
Well, it even sucked all the ashes off of the ground. There wasn't even any ashes left here. It was just like you got out there and swept with a broom.
All that seems natural to a man who has spent his 70 years living next to the Okefenokee. Davis has mapped and hunted most every inch and is now a guide. Folks around here say that they gave you a job with the federal government to keep you from poaching.
Well, some truth in that, I guess.
How many alligators did you get in one night?
38's the most I ever got one night.
The alligators in this canal are a sure sign of a new drought. The water is so low, boats bump along their backs. Most swamp trails are now too shallow for travel. In places, the Okefenokee looks like Kansas. Ironically, the concern is not that the swamp may be too dry and ready to burn, but it may still be too wet. After the mule-tail fire, the government built a dam to keep the swamp from drying up. That limits the size of a fire and protects property, but it could also mean the end of the swamp. Researchers have begun to study the effect the dam is having on the Great Swamp. They are concerned it may have altered nature's plan.
It would be helpful if we fluctuated the water level in the swamp so that the thing did dry up on a periodic basis.
Will anything besides a big fire save the swamp?
No. 150 to 200 years, you won't have no prairies. You'll have a few trails if they keep them opened up with trail cutters and your canals and some of your main places, but that'll be it.
Great stands of pine surround the swamp, cultivated forests that produce turpentine, timber, and pulpwood. Nearly 500,000 people stroke through its silent mirrors each year. The cycle of big fires could now be too costly. What has taken 1,000,000 years to make could be gone.
I wouldn't mind being buried in the swamp, to tell you the truth. Some of those islands would suit me fine.
Can the Okefenokee survive? The sound of the earth out here overwhelms a man's thoughts on that. And it reminds us that, in the end, nature does not always go by man's rules. For today, Bob Dotson, NBC News, in the Okefenokee Swamp.